I'm Sean Fennessey, and this is The Big Picture, a conversation show about popes. CR is here. He's been counting his Carrie Lake votes early. How are you feeling, Chris?
White smoke.
Today on the show, we are talking about Conclave, the new, I guess, papal conclave selection drama mystery movie.
It's a Pope thriller.
A Pope thriller from Focus Features, a major Oscar contender this year, and frankly, one of the most crowd-pleasing movies of 2024. Before we do that, crowd pleasers.
Yeah, man.
You had a great idea for this.
Thank you for saving this for me. I specifically asked you not to do this earlier in the week.
Appreciate you coming up with this idea. You did mention to me originally on the show maybe a week and a half ago that Christopher Nolan, there were some rumors, some theories about what his next project was going to be. He'd signed up with Universal. We learned that Matt Damon and Tom Holland were going to be the stars of his next movie, which I think is coming in the summer of 2026.
Mm-hmm.
What is this movie? Is it a horror movie? Is it a sci-fi movie? Is it maybe an inspired by and/or remake of the 1983 helicopter cop drama Blue Thunder?
Yeah.
It is, in fact, the latter.
When I said that to you, you had that look on your face where you're like, it's cute CR says things sometimes without checking them.
That is exactly what I thought.
Yeah.
Because every once in a while, you dip in with a rumor and you got it from like
hey.
moviefreaks.org. And I'm like, what? Where did this come from?
You wish. You wish it had a .org, man. These are deep Discord cuts where I'm just like, I have a guy.
But you were bang on about this one.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess this hasn't been officially confirmed. Christopher Nolan has not said it. I am, in fact, working on a remake of a John Badham movie that
He should, though. He should
11
do a
people
press
have
conference.
seen.
Emergency press conference.
I hadn't seen this movie in many years.
Yeah.
Did you revisit it?
I did, yeah.
Okay. Let me just say, it's not the best movie I've ever seen.
That's what makes it such a great idea.
Okay, so is it because you can immediately improve upon it?
Yes.
Yeah.
This is how adaptation is supposed to work.
Mm.
In the golden age of Hollywood, some of our favorite directors, Hitchcock, Hawks, all these people, they're like, let me take this, candidly, piece of shit and make it into Red River.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, they made the greatest films of all time with very thin, pulpy, whatever material. If we're going to live in a world of perpetual reimagining of intellectual property, and these studios are like, the only things we're making is something that already exists in our library that we can like iterate off of and that has some name recognition, who better than Chris Nolan, who's like, I could literally make anything. I'm going to take this weird Roy Scheider movie with Daniel Stern from the early 80s about chopper cops, but I'm going to make probably a futuristic movie about the dangers of technology or whatever he does, and then it's going to have time travel, of course, and a dead wife. And I think it will make $1 billion. And I think it is a good sign for Hollywood to be like, okay, fine. Like, we're running out of like ways to spin an officer and a gentleman, which they're all like Paramount's also trying to remake and stuff like that.
Not necessary, but okay.
Not necessary, and also beloved.
Right.
Beloved.
Right.
No one will top Richard Gere and Deborah Winger. I can almost guarantee that. But they can top Roy Scheider and Daniel Stern with all due respect to those wonderful actors. So I think that this is an amazing twist on IP.
The interesting thing about it, too, is that Nolan has not been in the skies since Dunkirk.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
Arguably the best part of Dunkirk is the Tom Hardy pilot dogfighting sequences.
And Jack Loudon, yeah.
And I assume that is what appeals to him, is to a new form of cinema thrills. You know, that like going into a helicopter and rendering images from that space is genuinely exciting to him, a major challenge, something he's never really totally tackled before. But you frame this to me very wisely, which is that Blue Thunder is a movie that I probably didn't see until the 2000s, but that I saw all the time in video stores. And that box, very memorably with the helicopter on it, is like would call out to you and you'd be like, what is that? I'm not sure what that is. Maybe you pulled it off the shelf. Maybe you didn't. And there were dozens, hundreds of movies like this if you spent a lot of time in video stores that were movies from the 1980s, movies for me often that were made when I was like 2 or 3 years old, but that you have like a sense memory of seeing them over and over and over again.
Some of them had like the tattered cover. Some of them were in the hard plastic case. But like, yeah, there's so many films from that era where I'm like, I have like exactly what you're saying, a sense memory of the cover of the movie more than I do the film itself.
So your idea was this, like, what are the VHS classics that we would want to see our favorite contemporary auteurs put their arms around, force a studio to relinquish the IP and let them remake it in their own imagination.
Yeah.
It's just an amazing idea. Thank you for bringing it to the table. So was there one that you had in mind off the bat? Like, is it the one at the top of your list? Like, where did this idea really come from, other than just knowing that Blue Thunder was one of those classics?
Well, it's this idea that if they're going to make it so difficult for people to make original films now, and if they're going to be so restrictive about that, then wouldn't it be cool if like this new wave or like our current contemporary kind of like best directors in class generation started to get to like sift around in the deep, Orion like video library and start messing around with like, well, what if we rebooted this or rebooted that? The challenge, as I'm sure Nolan is going to confront, now he's apparently, he has obviously not commented on this, setting this film in the near future or in a slightly futuristic sense. So we could get environmental collapse, Blade Runner, Chopper Cops. I have no idea like what he's thinking, but a lot of the movies that we're talking about here are going to be very much rooted in a very 80s aesthetic. So somewhat with that, I was thinking like filmmakers who might be able to capture that in a good way, but also update it. So mine, I have a bunch here that I put together where I basically matched a filmmaker with a video from the VHS store on the corner of my block when I was a kid. The movies that I've all seen since, and some love and some think could be improved upon.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to go through a few.
Yeah, let's go through a few. So you came up with 6.
I know.
Good
I was only supposed to be 5, but I wanted to do the 6th one there.
Well, then why don't you start with your number 6?
Okay, so people my age, people our age probably remember the video "The Hitcher." It's this movie with Rutger Hauer and C. Thomas Howell about a hitchhiker who picks up a hitchhiker who turns out to be a serial killer and gets involved in this cat and mouse game with Rutger Hauer as the killer. And this just feels like Ty West written all over it. I don't know what the current state of hitchhiking is in this country.
It's a really good question.
I can say that I am not participating in that gig economy.
Let's go downstairs here down in the Arts District and just try to hitch for a while.
Like, how far outside of like Los Angeles do you think you have to get to see a hitchhiker that you would feasibly pick up?
I mean, I would never pick up a hitchhiker.
Yeah.
But I am well trained.
Alice, move over.
I'm well trained in the art of serial killer movies.
Yeah.
That memorable scene in Zodiac where oh my God, what is the actress's name? Who has the baby in the back seat?
Oh, Ione Skye.
Ione Skye, yeah. That's one of the most chilling sequences in that whole movie. And I would never pick up a hitchhiker. I wonder if you could make this a period piece, though.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean, the reason why I thought of Ty West is the video cover, the VHS cover, is I think it's C. Thomas Howell's eyes in the rearview mirror, and it's basically a Ty West shot. And so you could either do this as a period piece about hitchhiking, or if there is a current kind of like subculture of 2024 hitchhikers, I would love to see him like mess around with that. But he obviously already has a fluency with the aesthetic of like this era of filmmaking.
Yeah, 80s. It's a pure slasher too. The Hitchhiker, the Hitcher. It's really violent, as I recall. Very good. Recently issued on 4K by Second Sight.
Fantastic.
So having a little moment, the Hitcher is right now. It's a great call. Ty is exactly the sort of filmmaker I'm thinking of who can kind of wrap their arms around something. And what you're talking about, this concept, is something that many executives in Hollywood are doing right now.
Yeah.
Like, they literally are going through the libraries at Paramount, at Warner's, at MGM, Orion, and saying, like, what was a kind of cool movie that I remember that no one else remembers? And so my number 5 is a version of that. Speaking of Blu-rays, this movie was issued on Blu-ray like a couple of years ago. It's called Little Darlings. And it's like sort of a sex comedy, sort of a coming-of-age drama. Stars Christy McNichol and Tatum O'Neal about 2 girls who are in essentially a race to lose their virginity. And it's simultaneously like a little sexy, but also a little predatory, but also weirdly sincere and affecting. Very, very early Matt Dillon performance in this movie. Directed by Ron Maxwell, but written by 2 women, which is unusual for its time. I think it was 1980.
Okay.
This feels like fresh meat for Coralie Farja.
Not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah. I wonder what the director of The Substance and Revenge could do with like a sex comedy, more or less. I was trying to find like a good sex comedy that it would be worthy of remake. And the truth is that 90% of them, maybe 99% of them, are just 3 guys who are horn dogs
Yeah.
are trying to break into the women's locker room. Like, that's the plot of most sex comedies between 1980 and 1989.
We could be here all day, but one of the movies that I was thinking of was Class with Andrew McCarthy
Good one.
and Jacqueline Bisset and John Cusack.
Yeah, Virginia Madsen.
Yeah. And I was trying to think of like who would do a good prep school sex drama.
Oh, that's a
sex
good
romp.
question.
And, you know, it's just such a like, you just don't see movies like that where sex is like the primary focus of the film so much anymore.
Mhm.
Like, rarely.
You think of because of the woke Gen Z generation?
Probably.
Yeah,
We're going to
yeah.
get into that with
Okay.
Conclave,
Yeah,
though. My next one is, I had considered assigning these filmmakers to my remake of Class,
Okay.
but instead, I'm going to put Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig on the disastrous Tom Hanks, Shelley Long comedy, The Money Pit, which I think is one of the reasons why I don't have a house still, is because I saw this movie at a very formative age.
Yeah. Is the other reason crypto?
The other reason is because of my papal election chances. I never know when I'm going to have to go
Just
to the
in case you have to
Vatican.
move to
Yeah.
Rome. Yeah.
This is kind of a disastrous like black comedy about a couple who sinks all of their money into a kind of almost haunted lowercase h house. Like
Mhm.
it's just constantly has things going wrong, and it goes a long way towards destroying their relationship. It's a bit of War of the Roses. It has like a kind of acidic kind of look at American consumerism and also like love. And I would just love to see Baumbach and Gerwig, who are obviously like, at least Greta Gerwig is like kind of shading a little bit towards the more affirmative, optimistic kind of, and now even fantasy like
Mhm.
genre filmmaking.
Yeah.
Baumbach still has like a really dark heart, I think.
He does.
And it would be funny to see them collaborate on a film about a couple who lose all their money.
Yeah. A kind of Romana Clef about
Yeah.
what it's like being together.
Yes.
It's a really good idea. I like that one a lot. Who would be your stars?
Oh, that's a great question. Driver and Johansson back.
They could do it. I mean, two of the, how are you feeling about Adam Driver box office poison rumors going around these days?
I don't really think about. I don't think about it at all. Honestly, like
okay.
I for some reason I'm getting served a lot of girls clips on my Instagram,
Interesting.
and he's just bodying everyone.
Is
like
that
he's
because you've got Allison Williams as one of your tabs at all times? You got her page open?
yeah, only from Get Out.
Yeah. Your dream girl, of course. That's a great pick. I like that one a lot. This one is for you. I chose this one for you. There is a movie that I hadn't seen until I think COVID is the first time I saw it, but I saw this VHS box so many times in the video store. The Fred Ward vehicle, Remo Williams: The Adventure Begins. This is essentially like an action adventure movie directed by Guy Hamilton, who directed a bunch of Bond movies. It's his attempt to make like kind of an American spy thriller. And it's about a New York City cop who wakes up one day and realizes he's no longer who he thought he was. And he's actually like a CIA spy who is meant to commit assassinations. Very strange movie of like mistaken identity and action excitement. Hasn't aged that well.
Yeah.
Joel Grey plays a Korean man in the film.
Oh.
Not ideal. A remnant of a different time.
Yeah.
Your boy Wilford Brimley is in this movie.
How old does he look?
I think he was 26 and he looks about 58.
Yeah.
But it's a kind of a fun movie. It's schlocky. It's kind of a Tubi classic.
Yeah, this is this was right next to Buckaroo Banzai
Yes.
in the VHS cover Olympics.
Yes. Also for the most words in the title
Yes.
Olympics. I think, what if we just gave this to Nicholas Winding Refn
Sure.
and said, Ryan Gosling, you are Remo Williams.
And you want to fuck your mom.
Would
But
you-
first you have to fight this man in Thailand.
Would we devote 8 episodes or 16 episodes of this show to that?
I
that
would want to
movie?
wait for Amanda to get back.
Okay, what do you got next?
Okay, I can burn through a couple of these. Was thinking about Lee Isaac Chung after Twisters
Mhm.
and getting it making a little bit more of a smaller feature.
Oh, you
after
want him
that.
to scale down?
Yeah, a little bit.
Minari 2?
He has a really good feel for small towns. I think he has a really good feel for young people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would like him to remake my favorite BMX movie ever made, Rad. Did you ever see this?
I have seen it, yeah.
It's basically Karate Kid and Breaking Away, but with
On
freestyle
bikes.
bike races, BMX bike races, and freestyle riding. I just think this would be sick. It has incredible music. If you haven't seen it, this got restored to 4K recently.
Tim Simon's huge fan of this movie, bought the 4K.
What a planet we live on.
It's crazy.
While we still have it. And so
this was a cable classic for sure.
This is
on TV
a
all the
huge
time.
movie for me. Like, I got me into BMX. I definitely face planted.
And look at you now.
I know.
Multiple X Games champion.
So yeah, I would love to see take a step down from the world of blockbusters to make this movie about a guy who rides BMX bikes.
Do you think Lee Isaac Chung will do that? Scale back and do a drama after dipping his toe into the blockbuster world?
I do wonder. I mean, like, I feel like he is at a little bit of an inflection point. It would be great if he's the kind of filmmaker who could do both.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And make like kind of more personable dramas. But I would imagine. Do you think that there's going to be Twisters?
Zzz,
Yeah,
with 4 Z's.
Yeah. Where they kiss?
That's a tricky one. You were pro Twisters?
Yeah, I thought it was fine. But I also
Okay.
like Twister more than you, so I
You
think
do.
I was a little bit.
I know.
I was like,
I know I'm on
here's
the
the
outside with that
differences,
one.
and that got in my head a little bit.
I think that movie didn't do well overseas at all.
Mm.
It was a huge bomb, and it was this weird situation where Universal released it in the States, sold the rights to the international to Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers having a tough time getting people to see movies in 2024. They didn't do well with that one either. Some people say, hey, Twister's not as much of a thing in non-US countries, but it didn't really play, so I don't know if there's going to be another $200 million Twister movie.
Right.
Nevertheless, Lee Isaac Chung, I think he should make Joker 3. What do you think?
Did you comment yet on Quentin Tarantino's comments on Joker 2?
Well, let me tell you, I got a sneak preview of that one a few weeks ago. I know he listened to our episode about it, and he didn't agree. He's a fan of the film. Can't say I totally understand what he's saying. Actually, on the Brett Easton Ellis podcast, Quentin talked about it at length with Roger Avery. I thought what Roger had to say about the movie, and he liked it, was very interesting. I thought his read of it was really, really sharp.
Okay.
It actually made me think about the movie a little bit differently. I thought Quentin's read of it was very funny, but he liked it for the reasons I didn't like it, which is that the director said,
Fuck you.
Fuck you guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, my number 3, another movie I just saw recently, but that I saw in video stores all the time and was like, what is this weird New Zealand film? It's called The Quiet Earth. Have you ever seen this?
No.
Jeff Murphy movie. It's essentially about, it's a common trope. It's like a what if you woke up and the world was gone and everyone that you knew was gone. And, you know, like Night of the Comet is like this. Obviously the Omega Man and the I Am Legend. And, you know, there's a number of movies that use this trope. But this one has this kind of like chilling desert tone where the entire landscape is this sort of like abandoned, all sand and municipal buildings, and that's kind of all you're experiencing. The actor at the center of it is named Bruno Lawrence. He's amazing in this movie. I don't know if I've ever seen him in anything else, but it's basically like it's like Dune if everyone died.
Cool.
And I just feel like Denis Villeneuve could crush this because like desolation is like one of his key themes. So I would love to see him take a crack at it.
Do you think he's looking for another sand project?
I don't know. I mean, do you think he's looking for another cartel assassin project?
No, not necessarily.
You know,
yeah,
could be. He's what is he doing next?
Well, it sounds like 3 is coming.
I guess that's true. Yeah, but he also he sign up to do a nuclear annihilation film based on a work of nonfiction? I think that he did.
Oh yeah,
but maybe that'll be after the third Dune film.
Well, we get the Catherine Bigelow nuclear annihilation film on Netflix.
Yes. Well, the second part was disappointing, but heck of a cast in that film right now as well. I'm looking forward to that. What's next for you?
My number 3 is a big picture favorite filmmaker, Arkasha Stevenson, taking on, this is hardly a like Lost classic, but it is a classic. And this is just the same, The Lost Boys.
Just bought this on 4K.
This is ready-made for her. I think that she would do a great job if she decided to keep it in the, what is it, Santa Cruz area, like where, and this whole like carnival boardwalk atmosphere, teenage vampires who are preying on this town, and these new kids who move into town, and one gets recruited to join this vampire clique. It's awesome, and I just think she would do such a great job with both the younger people who are in it, and also like the atmosphere.
Great pick. Eagerly anticipating Arkasha's next movie. My number 2 is 3 O'Clock High. Phil Janot comedy thriller set in a high school that is a very loose but pointed remake of High Noon. That's a very funny movie. Actually, speaking of Roger Avery, he talked about it on our 1987 movie draft. I think he selected it, which was kind of a modest hit at the time, but that illustrated cover of the guy hanging from the giant clock is like stuck in my head. When you said VHS classic, I thought of 3 O'Clock High right away. And it's a movie about stress and time slipping away. So who better than the Safdie brothers to make this movie? So yeah, that's that pick. Who should be in that movie though? Who's a high school? Well, Gabriel LaBelle is now too old for that.
You think so? Because he's played Lorne Michaels, he can't go back to high school. That's always a complicated thing when a kid breaks out of the kid roles.
Yeah,
he kind of can't go back.
You're right. We should do Brad Pitt instead.
Benjamin Button. Brad Pitt.
Okay, what's next for you?
Last two. I have The Legend of Billie Jean, directed by Sean Baker. So this is a.
Have you seen Anora yet?
No, okay. I haven't. Okay. But I've seen his other films.
That would be amazing if he was like, I'm following up my Best Picture winning triumph with a remake of Billie Jean.
Yeah, I was like, what could Sean Baker do? And it's this movie with Helen and Christian Slater from the early 80s about these 2 kids in Corpus Christi.
No relation.
Yeah. Who one of them, like they buy like they're young working class kids and they get like a scooter, and a rich kid in town destroys the scooter like in a bullying act, and they basically like take it out on him. They extract their money back and then have to go on the run and become folk heroes in Texas. And it's got like a real early viral fame aspect to it, which I kind of wonder whether or not he could capture really well. He's obviously got a facility working with young people, but also understands like the kind of contemporary language of using your phone a lot. Sean Baker being like, look at this person went viral famous probably is a little bit low stakes after he wins likely an Oscar for Anora or whatever. But
yeah, but I mean, Anora is like a pretty ultimately grounded movie. And this is, it's Bonnie and Clyde, right? Yeah. So there's always something fun about, is Billie Jean in this film a sex worker? Because that would probably determine whether or not Sean Baker would be interested in making this film. But
some cynicism.
Okay. My last one is kind of a cheat.
It's fine. It's exactly what you should be doing here.
So The People Under the Stairs is another movie that I saw the VHS box for a long time. I could never convince my parents to rent this movie. I always wanted to see it. It's a Wes Craven classic. Wes Craven is a huge inspiration for Jordan Peele. This movie is a big inspiration for Jordan Peele. This movie is, very much a precursor to Get Out, very much a kind of allegorical horror thriller about racism and class and the way that, our society is structured, all set around like a pair of older white people trying to kill a black family. I would love to see Peele remake it. The thing with The People Under the Stairs is it has a really strong reputation. I personally don't think it's very good. It's never really worked for me. I haven't really loved it. Maybe was a little too old when I saw it and it didn't live up to its reputation. But it's such a good concept and it's such a Peelean structure.
That's what we're looking for here. Is it's not necessarily like, I want movies that these filmmakers can take and be like, and in fact, I would say Lost Boys is the worst one I picked in that regard because it would be like something that I think a lot of people are like,
have a personal attachment to.
You need to have the shirtless guy playing saxophone in this movie. Right. How can you not? But most of these films, like you could pretty much take the bones, you could just take the concept, you could take the setting, you could take the vibe, and you could do whatever you want with it, which is kind of what it sounds like Nolan's going to do with. I mean, is he going to call this movie Blue Thunder?
I doubt it, but who knows? Maybe he will. It sounds like it's more inspiration than remake. Okay, what's your last one?
My last one is The Hot Spot, which is a Dennis Hopper movie from 1990 that I thought was pornography. So I never rented until I was much older.
Yeah.
And
the good news is it is close to pornography in the best way.
It's Don Johnson, Virginia Madsen, and Jennifer Connelly. And Jennifer Connelly and Virginia Madsen are essentially like Roger Clemens and
Pedro
Steve
Martinez.
Avery.
Yeah.
Like the catcher mitt was exploding, And they are fantastic in this movie. It's a noir set in Texas about a guy who comes to town and becomes like a car salesman and gets involved in a fucked up love triangle and a bank robbery. So it's essentially like my idea of heaven. And Jeremy Saulnier should direct it.
It's great. I don't know how we can recreate Virginia Madsen and Jennifer Connelly in 1989 or whenever this movie came out.
We flip it. Maybe it's a woman comes to town and it's like a Lordy and
and Austin Butler. Yeah. Great. Love it. And who's the gal? Sydney Sweeney. We're done. Let's print money. It's that simple. Bob, you into that movie?
I guess so. Would I be able to work at the Ringer if I said no?
Bobby's just thinking about Clemens and Steve Avery.
You got me caught up talking about Pedro and Clemens. I'm like, 86 Clemens, what's going on?
Exploding mitts. That's really what got your mind going.
Yes, exactly.
The mitt was exploding. That's what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that. You're looking
therapy.
Yeah, you're looking forward to the next Nolan movie, in other words.
Over under $1 billion at the box office.
I'll say under.
Okay.
Bold.
Just because.
Really bold.
You know, $1 billion is hard to do.
Didn't Oppenheimer make $1 billion?
It did. I think it was like 980 million. Maybe it went over with a re-release.
They just have to set off a nuke in this Blue Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
976 million worldwide.
That was pretty close on that guess. I thought it got over eventually. So, in his career, how many billion-dollar movies do you think he has?
2.
What are they?
Dark Knight Rises.
You nailed it. Now, those movies feature Batman. So, could be a challenge to get a helicopter movie over $1 billion.
The choppers are flying over a cityscape, and just for a quick second, Batman is like... That's it. Bale comes back. Just be like...
Yeah. Well, this is the downside of pivoting to Universal. They don't have the rights to Batman.
For people who are just listening, I did Batman standing on a building throwing up deuces.
Yes.
Just be like, yeah.
What if it was just Bale? Like it wasn't Batman, but it was just Christian Bale?
Mike Berry from Big Short. And he was drumming.
Didn't that guy break bad? Isn't he?
He's
not an agreeable type these days. Okay, that's great. What do you think is
Remember when he shorted water?
But that's how the film ends.
Yeah.
It's like his next project, water. We still have water. That worked out okay.
Right here, baby.
That's right. That's a reusable glass. Thanks for your service. This is not. What's the 4th highest grossing Christopher Nolan film?
Inception.
It is Inception. Yeah. 825 million.
Is Oppenheimer 3rd?
Oppenheimer's 3rd, yeah.
And what did Dunkirk do?
509 million.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great example of how we still come out for films.
So I didn't tell you this, but I want to do top 5 World War II films for the Blitz episode.
Can I just stay here?
Yeah.
Let's do it now. Stay in this seat? Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk briefly about Woman of the Hour.
Yeah.
I don't know why this slipped past me. I saw this movie a long time ago. It has been number 1 or 2 on Netflix for quite a while now, a few weeks. It's done very, very well on the service. It's Anna Kendrick's directorial debut. She also stars in the movie. And it is really in our sweet spot in many ways. It's a 70s LA set thriller about a serial killer that is sort of diced to show the perspective of multiple potential victims of this killer. It's based on a true story. The log line is essentially, what if a serial killer went on the dating game?
Yes.
And that is something that actually happened in the 1970s. Anna Kendrick plays the woman who is the sort of the contestant on the dating game who is interviewing the 3 men behind a locked door, and one of those 3 is the killer. But then we also see these other experiences that the killer is having throughout the frame of the movie. What do you think of this movie?
I was really impressed by it.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, there's like a separate conversation to have about how well I think Anna Kendrick has like sold this movie to people, and her sort of press run where she's going on Call Her Daddy and stuff, but also talking about David Fincher and it's been a really impressive. She's very prevalent right now.
Yeah. I would not have guessed this would have been the kind of movie that she would make based on some of the work that she's done in the past.
And then it's a really savvy film that I think very wisely surfs the true crime mania that's happening.
Yes, she has appeared on like the Crime Junkie podcast. She's like making the rounds in those spaces too. But also simultaneously, I think being very respectful of not exploiting the crimes and the victims of the crimes in particular.
Are there any examples of people doing that in contemporary pop culture?
I don't know what you mean. Yeah. Not at this podcast.
Let's just go to the Menendez brothers' house right now. But I think this movie has a lot of ideas.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that kind of makes it rise above just its usual, like, kind of Ryan Murphy, like, gawking at crimes of the past stuff. And, there's some legitimate, like, did her Laura Mulvey homework stuff in here about the male gaze and about like the like societal mores about how women communicate with each other wordlessly about danger It's really pretty awesome. I mean, there are some also deeply unpleasant moments with Daniel Lovato, who plays the killer, who people may remember from Station 11.
I was just going to say, he's kind of typecast in a deeply unfortunate way right now.
But he's very good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he is.
Kendrick is like, it's pretty punishing. Like those scenes can be incredibly uncomfortable, but I really liked it. What did you think?
Yeah, same. I thought it was really slick and propulsive and confusing in the good way, where the kind of the sharded structure kept me engaged and kind of trying to figure out what was going to happen next. I think also the dating game structure of it is really effective. I think Tony Hale's really funny as the like deeply smarmy, misogynistic host of the show. And Anna Kendrick has kind of consistently been a very, very good actor who has taken on some commercial stuff that I haven't really liked that much, or has like slipped into the VOD strain or streaming movie strain a little bit over time. But she's pretty impressive overall. And I thought I didn't want too much time to go by without just citing that this is a really solid thriller, the kind of movie that I'm kind of always complaining we don't have.
Yeah.
And I think it played at TIFF in 2023 and was acquired and took a long time to come to the service, but it's a solid movie.
Yeah, and it's, I think, a really good example of Netflix taking on a movie that frankly probably would have had a hard time just going up against whatever's in theaters right now.
Yes. If Smile 2 would have trounced this movie.
But this is a like bizarro world where like Woman of the Hour is like the most popular movie in the world right now. So that's pretty cool.
More people may have seen it than seen Smile 2, which is a fascinating outcome. And and it's not awards bait. It's not anything like that. It's just it's a good, solid thriller with some strong ideas.
Yeah, I hope she makes more movies.
Sort of the other side of that coin is a movie like Conclave, which is also a very solid thriller that is a theatrical movie that looks on the surface to be very important. And it's based on a novel I had not heard of, written by Robert Harris. It's got a screenplay by Peter Strawn. It's directed by Edward Berger, whose last movie was All Quiet on the Western Front, the 2022 World War I drama. It's got the same composer as that film, Volker Bertelmann, who is acclaimed for that 3-toned score that he had in that film. And then the actors in this movie, Ralph Fiennes, Stanley Tucci, John Lithgow, and Isabella Rossellini, among others who we will discuss, is as Tony and upscale as you can possibly get. This movie debuted at the Telluride Film Festival. That's where I first saw it. It's about a cardinal who is tasked with one of the world's most secretive and ancient events, participating in the selection of a new pope. Pope storytelling has been resonant for about 10 years now. It's been resonant for you for about 25.
Sure.
In the process of preparing this new pope selection, a lot of intrigue unfurls in Vatican City and specifically at this conclave. And so, like I said, on the surface, this looks like a very, what could be a very staid, quiet drama about men with big ideas in a kind of like simmering agony. And is that sort of?
Yeah.
But it is a lot of other things. So what did you think of Conclave?
I was deeply entertained by this movie. Exactly what you were kind of alluding to, that this is the reliable, crowd-pleasing, I think, in a weird way, drama that we don't really have in the theaters that much anymore. And strangely, I saw it last night in a packed movie theater in Glendale.
Me too. I saw it on Monday night and it was packed.
And people were hooting and hollering.
There are great laugh lines in this movie.
And applauded at the end. So it was very strange. It was almost like going to see The Firm in the 90s or something.
Great. And that's exactly what it is, because even though the story is set in this world of the Roman Catholic Church and, you know, the way that power operates, it's just pulp.
Yeah.
It's a super pulpy story. I think it flatters a certain kind of coastal sensibility in some ways, which we can talk about, but it is just like purely entertaining through and through.
Right.
And so it's fascinating that it has been elevated to, you know, the high-minded awards race, because if it were not popes, if it were just, I don't know, even if it were just a Senate race, I think it would not seem as quote unquote important, but it would be just as slick, just as fun, just as ridiculous at times too. That's the other thing, is like, there's a lot of scenery chewing in this movie. There's a lot of speechifying, but you also have it as this contrast with Berger style, which is so austere and painterly at times, but also is kind of grinding through this airport novel story.
It's funny. There's a moment in this film where Fiennes' character is preparing the Vatican for all the cardinals to be sequestered. So they're going to be cut off from the outside world. And he's worried that some cardinals might be too claustrophobic because they're putting all this armor essentially on the windows so that nobody can listen in or somehow read lips or anything from what's happening in there. And you could say the same thing might have been the case with the film, because this movie is taking place in like a dozen rooms maybe, but all looking very the same. And what happens is Berger uses detail to provide scope. So he is very, very, very focused on what's in people's desk drawers and the glasses that they use to read and all of the kind of costuming of the cardinals. And so you don't even notice that you haven't left these rather drab apartments. You think of the Vatican and you think of all the history and all the art and the beautiful, paintings and stuff like that. But this is basically like 12 guys going to work and essentially 12 guys going to jury duty.
It is very much a movie like a jury duty.
I think there's more than 12 dudes, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's 108 cardinals who come together to vote. But you're right that there is this reliance on essentially insert shots, the way that the movie is cut, where you're constantly seeing, it reminded me a little bit of The Substance in this way, where this sort of like hyper focus on individual items. One of my favorite shots in the movie is this quiet moment as we're preparing for all the cardinals to arrive, where we see this kind of pile of cigarettes out on the floor, which, the cardinals are well known for continuing to smoke.
Yeah. I guess Zinn hasn't hit the Vatican yet.
It has not. You can do some evangelizing yourself if you'd like.
That'll be my platform.
The movie reveals like all this great detail about this subterranean world that we don't know very much about, that feels very mysterious, but is ultimately just like how any kind of cliquey environment works, where it's like that there are the favorites. It is very partisan. People feel strongly about their ideas. They don't want to listen to other people.
They're easily identifiable into these like incredibly like recognizable categories of liberal, conservative. You will watch this, and if you've never set foot in a Catholic church, you'll recognize our political reality taking place in this election.
So your relationship to the Holy See.
Yeah.
It's been reported that you once had a blog spot.
Do you think anyone knows what that is?
A blog spot?
Yeah.
Jack, do you know what a blog spot is?
In the aughts.
Jack has no idea. Jack, our video producer, who is, what are you, Jack, 24? 23. Jack is 23 and never heard of a blog spot. Bobby, you've heard of a blog spot.
Not only have I heard of one, I had several.
Okay, there you go. Okay. That's important.
So blogs are just like, this was like your self-published blogs that we used to have in the aughts. Sean had one. I had many.
Yes.
Did you have many or did you just have one?
I had a few.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had one about the papal conclave to elect Joseph Ratzinger. It was one post. I was going to be tracking the election, and it was a really quick election. So it was just like poof, white smoke, and God's Rottweiler got elected immediately. So I just shut the blog down.
The name of that blog spot was Conclave So Real, which was a riff on, was it Houston So Real?
Yes.
Matt Sanzala's Houston rap blog spot, which you were riffing on at the time. God. Chris Ryan in was that 06 or 07? You were in a legendary form back then. And I remember you being so excited, and I was like, I didn't know the Pope died. I didn't know we were picking a new Pope. Lapsed Catholic in the 2000s.
I have 38 questions, but just the one question here is that you wanted to write this blog in support of him getting elected?
No, it was just going to be my journalism.
It was the Drudge Report for this papal conclave.
It was going to be like Hoops Hype, but for the Pope.
Right.
And I was going to just aggregate, and maybe just riff. I never even got another candidate. It was just it's gonna be Ratzinger, and he fucking boat walked.
It's really funny though too, because this movie goes to great pains to show us how agonizing this process can be, and that there are complexities and scandals within these organizations. You've got these men who have been in these positions of power for a long time and how they abuse their power. Ratzinger was he had a controversial life. He had a lot of views that were really aggressive at a time when the church needed a more progressive voice. And the last couple of popes since him have been much more progressive. But the idea that he just cakewalked through.
Yes.
He just Reagan in 84'd his way through. Was very strange.
Yeah. I mean, it was a shock to everyone at Conclave So Real. I had to lay a lot of people off. we had gotten a lot of seed investment.
It was a tough time in media, you know? You really had to scale back.
Has Substack reached out to you offering like $5 million Barry Wise style to try to get the IP
To revive it?
To revive it. I'll just do it as a pod.
And that's the problem with media these days. So you're not Catholic.
I'm not.
I am Catholic.
Yeah.
Have you been to the Vatican?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
What'd you think?
It was very beautiful.
Yeah. What do you think about the ideas in the Roman Catholic Church? What do you think about the sort of the way that they see the world?
Well, I can't speak to. I mean, you can speak to that. Do you think that it's been formative to your personality?
I don't think the ideas have.
Definitely for my wife, who was raised Catholic.
I mean, I think the way that the ideas are imported to you then shapes how you experience the world, which is that if you transgress, you feel a deep sense of shame and guilt, and it's hard to express those feelings. Mm-hmm. And so you invariably are like kind of push everything down. That's one of the classic archetypes of Catholicism. From the perspective of the devout. You know?
I think for my wife, it's more of a rejection of a lot of
it. And that's the flip side of it is if you reject it, I rejected it, of course. Your wife went to Catholic school. I didn't go to Catholic school, but I spent a lot of time in church as a kid. And I think that this movie is very aware of our very uncomfortable relationship with the church, our sense that the church is rife with scandal at all times. That's part of the fun of it. I think there have been movies like this. I just watched the Christopher Reeve documentary, Superman, about his life and his tragic accident and his journey to sort of make people more aware of spinal injuries. Very touching film. But it reminded me of a movie that he made in 1982 called Monsignor, about a corrupt cardinal, which is a very similar kind of movie. And also, The Godfather Part 3, of course, and International Immobiliare, your beloved storyline, features this.
International Immobiliare. This fucking movie needed some international.
Needed that guy?
Yeah.
We have a version of that guy in this film. I think everybody knows that the church has a history of corruption.
Yeah.
And nevertheless, the movie is plotted so hilariously, like an Agatha Christie novel. Every 10 minutes, something new is revealed to us. Some bizarre transgression or mysterious backdoor payment, or someone has been imported from Africa to, tell tales about another cardinal. That it's just kind of gripping the way like a good TV show is gripping.
Yeah.
Where you're like, what's going to happen next?
There was something that happens about midway through this film. Do you want to do spoilers yet? I can talk about it.
Let's talk about it more broadly, and then we have to get into spoilers.
It's actually not a twist. It is a subtle change in human behavior that is incredibly recognizable, and I identified a lot with it. I saw it. I did not see it coming, but it was like, oh, of course, because Stanley Tucci and Ralph Fiennes and John Lithgow are incredible actors, and they can project a wide spectrum of human emotions while also maintaining a stable character. And I think that the thing I would say about this film is it never really insults the audience's intelligence, or at least not on a massive way. I mean, maybe some of the twists that happen within the election itself are a little beyond belief or whatever, but the actual human behavior is actually very adult. And so there's one character who is pegged early on as a possible pope, and his whole thing is like, I don't want it. And then slowly but surely you see midway through the film that he's like, of course I want it. Like nobody ever.
I loved this choice too.
Nobody who's ever become a cardinal hasn't thought about what their name as pope would be.
Part of the reason this works so well is what you cited, though. That character, I don't think it's a spoiler to say because this takes place in the first 20 minutes of the movie, is Stanley Tucci.
Yeah.
Stanley Tucci early in the film is tapped as a potential pope.
And he plays this Aldo Bellini in the novel. He's Italian.
He's American in this film.
He's just an American. They do a nice Hunt for Red October job of just being like, you guys.
It doesn't matter what country,
talk in your accents.
Tucci is exceptional in this movie because of his ability to switch register so quickly from very strident, belief-oriented person who is not in seek of anything beyond his own values very quickly to what happens whenever you are proximate to power and the opportunity arises to take some of it.
Yes.
How quickly not just you will turn, but you will show so openly, so nakedly how much you want it. And the movie is obviously hinging on that across the board because during the papal conclave, this is not something I really understood at all. multiple people can be voted for.
Mhm.
This is not a bifurcated election between two men. In the rounds that take place throughout this film, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 men are getting votes.
Lots of
across
people
this
vote for
100 people.
themselves for the first time.
Yes.
Yeah, just to throw their name out
Just
there.
to, yeah, exactly. Just to kind of inspire a potential run towards something. And, you know, you need 2/3 vote from the conclave to ascend to Pope. And so it's a series of voting and voting and voting. You indicated the white smoke. When there's no Pope selected over the Vatican, you see black smoke, a kind of gray smoke over in Vatican City. When one is selected, you see white smoke. The movie hinges on this. It is a bit like 12 Angry Men, where you kind of show a show of hands as to who thinks he's guilty versus not guilty, all done in kind of a secret vote. It seems like everyone wants it, though, too. That's the other thing about this movie. We only learn about 7 or 8 men who are participating in this situation, but you kind of get the sense that anybody who's under the age of 75 would be interested in this job, which is fascinating because I guess it's sort of like any job where you're like, I could be the CEO one day.
And these guys are basically, I mean, it's essentially like a parliamentary election where you've got these voting blocks that are trying to entice other blocks into their coalition because it's like, well, you don't want it to be the other guy.
Mhm.
So if you guys aren't going to win and my guy is second, let's make sure the guy who's first doesn't win by like collating all of this as a maybe centrist administration rather than a liberal or a conservative one. So all of that stuff is really fascinating. And yeah, the ambition of these guys, and a lot of them are walking around being like, well, I'll just leave Rome. You know, it's okay. I've come to the end of my road here. And it's like, oh, but maybe I'll be Secretary of State, or maybe I'll be this, or maybe I'll be that. So there's a lot of favor doing. There's a lot of intrigue. Berger makes an interesting decision to basically keep the vote whipping to 2 or 3 kind of beautifully staged scenes in a theater, it seems like. But you don't do a ton of, there's not a ton of insight into how these people are changing other people's minds. And that actually for me was cool because it gave the film an almost, spiritual or supernatural air of like how the movement of the votes seemed to like move from one guy to another. And so there would be gossip, but you wouldn't necessarily see everybody just decide, well, obviously this guy had a bad lunch, so now he's out, you know?
Yeah, I mean...
But not unlike our elections,
It
right?
reminded me a lot of 2020 and the Democratic nominees and who it felt like things were tipping towards at various times. And then all of a sudden,
this is like
South Carolina happens and this is what we're doing and it's over and it's decided. And the movie operates in the same way. The movie is a very, very heavy-handed metaphor, allegory for electoral politics across the board. It's hilarious that it is being released in the last week of October. And we are on the verge of what is, once again, I guess, the most important election of our lifetimes. Sure. I think the movie is ultimately a success because it has Ralph Fiennes at the center of it. You know, we just did an episode on the Grand Budapest Hotel on the Rewatchables, and we talked about his fascinating career and just like what a remarkable, pliable, funny, devastating, hugely flexible actor he is.
He does all of that in this movie.
This movie, you know, Manohla Dargis had this great observation in her review of the movie, which was that he is arguably the single best communicator of a feeling with a very subtle gesture in his face. This is a big movie with a lot of big moments, but he, you know, is this cardinal who is very close to the Pope, but is in a bit of a crisis of faith. But he's also been tasked with this huge job of wrangling this 100+ group of very powerful, very pointed men. And he has like a really clear sense of what is the right way to go about doing things. And at times, actually, I think he may be wrong in the way that he approaches things. And he breaks certain rules that you're not supposed to break. But his certitude and power in pursuing those things is fascinating because the movie is dotted early on with a speech about how the biggest sin is certainty in the world. And yet, throughout this process, he kind of leans on his own certainty. He is the Poirot, the Miss Marple, like the key kind of detective figure in the story, while also being its clear moral conscience throughout. Fiennes is just great.
Yeah,
it's one of his best movies.
Moments where I think that you could call it a crisis of faith are his moments of a crisis of ambition. It's when he starts to believe in his own
chances.
Yeah, chances and maybe the divine kind of plan for him. And it's like Tucci, Fiennes can play 3 different emotions in a scene. He can be domineering. He can be tearful. He can be very funny. There's a few take your hands off my lobby boy moments in this film, intentionally or not. And I was very surprised to hear people responding in the theater vocally to him like commanding their emotions. Like, it's kind of a wild crowd participation film.
It is,
but it is kind of becoming that.
It reminds me a little bit more of how you feel when you're watching a comedy or a horror movie, where you want to kind of interact with the screen. And I think it's because it's surprising that it's that kind of movie. Most people who are sitting down are expecting something much more rigorous and much more serious. And it's not. I mean, it's not schlocky, but it is pulpy. The pulpiest of the characters by far to me is Tedesco, who is played by Sergio Castellitto.
He's the Cardinal of Venice.
He is the Cardinal of Venice, and he is a extremely conservative figure. He is really the key opponent of whoever will be the progressive representative in this race, and a number of people fill that space during the course of the film. And I've never seen this man before, and he is absolutely cooking in this movie. He is so funny, so forceful, so ridiculous, and yet so real.
Yeah.
He so feels to me like an arch-conservative politician with his version of certitude, with his version of sectarianism, with his version of going back to the old way. He is a strict constructionist, and he's somebody who wants to bring the church back to where it should be in his mind.
As long as you're allowed to vape in that version of the church. Because he hits
film.
the pen so hard in this movie, and there's a couple of like, yes, serve moments where he's just like dazzling around in loafers and like hitting his vape pen while he like puts Parmesan on his gnocchi. It's just fucking incredible.
He's like in an episode of RuPaul's Drag Race while also being a cardinal. It's fascinating. He's really, really fun and funny in this movie. And I guess the other big performer that we should mention is Isabella Rossellini's in this movie. When I was getting ready to see the movie at Telluride, everybody was like, Isabella Rossellini, Academy Award, it's coming. I think that's a little overstated relative to the amount of time she gets in the movie.
It would have to be for basically one scene. Because otherwise she is just like standing.
Quietly scowling.
Yeah.
But the one scene is very good.
Okay, I can't put you on the spot like this, but I want you to think about it. How many one scene Oscars are there? Like where it's like it's a supporting actor performance and it's essentially like based on the back of like one great scene.
I mean, there are two very memorable examples in supporting actress with actresses who had less than 10 minutes of screen time. One is Judi Dench in Shakespeare in Love, which is often considered a career Oscar, though she does have a big speech, a kind of memorable sequence. And then the other one is Beatrice Straight in Network, where she gives this one speech about, commanding respect from her husband, who's played by William Holden. And that's one of the more powerful sequences in a movie full of powerful sequences. So like it happens. It does happen. I mean, I called Anthony Hopkins a fraud for his best actor win in Silence of the Lambs with like less than 30 minutes of screen time.
He stole all that Miggs spotlight,
Yeah. Where's Miggs' Oscar? I ask you now. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. She also has definitely less than 20 minutes of screen time in this movie, but she is a pivotal figure in the telling of the story. This is a very entertaining movie, a very silly movie.
You see it at Telluride thinking it was like a Best Picture favorite, and then it kind of fell short. Like what was?
No, it's the opposite. I think I expected something boring. I got something that's a lot of fun. I still think it's a Best Picture favorite. I think that's much more a reflection of the slate this year, and also just like the names attached to it. Because it's Fiennes, because it's Edward Berger, because it's a Focus Features movie and all this stuff, it kind of is like casting aside some of the goofiness of it. I think we should talk about the ending of the movie, though.
Yeah, sure.
There's a character that we haven't discussed yet that is pretty critical. So if you do not want to know the ending of Conclave, you do not want to know any more about this story. We have not really spoiled very much, to be honest, through this entire conversation. But it's pretty critical to talk about how the movie will be received. Especially when it comes to, more so awards rather than box office, but let's go through it. So there is another cardinal who's introduced early on in the film, a cardinal that the other cardinals were not aware of and Dean Lawrence is not aware of either. He is the Cardinal of Kabul in Afghanistan. And he has
served in Baghdad in the Congo.
Yes, and he has recently started a ministry in that space after being one of the chief missionaries in that space for a long time. And the only person who had known that this man had been made a cardinal was the Pope who dies at the beginning of the film. And there's a lot of aspects of the story that are only communicated by way of the Pope told me this before he died.
Mhm.
That's a big way that they kind of shield us from information throughout the telling of the story. So I just want to make sure I have the actor's name who plays the cardinal.
Carlos Diaz.
So Carlos Diaz plays Vincent Cardinal Benitez. And Benitez is this critical figure because even though Ray Fiennes' character is meant to be the moral center, Benitez is this kind of unwavering point of light. He is someone who represents purely the intentions of the church's ideology, not its history, not its the sort of warfare that it's engaged in with the progressive left or other faiths and the way that they're intersecting in our world. Benitez is this person who has seen war, has seen true terror in the world, and he is steadfast in his beliefs in the power of faith. Through circumstance, after cycling through John Lithgow's Tremblay, after cycling through Stanley Tucci's character Bellini, after cycling even through Ray Fiennes' character Lawrence as potential popes in the progressive mold, buttressing against Tedesco, somehow after a bold speech that he delivers.
It's worth mentioning that there's a like B plot to the film and is I think a much bigger deal in Harris's novel where there has been terrorist activity in and around Rome, and it's understood that there is it's a concerted attack on Catholics, and it's happening like in Europe wide.
Yes.
So at one point, finds his character, votes for himself as Pope, and an explosion happens and it shatters all these windows and blows some of the frescoes off. And it's like this huge moment of almost like a lightning bolt coming down from heaven about this guy's hubris. And it leads to a huge confrontation between Tedesco and Benitez about which direction the Pope, the church should turn in this conflict. And Tedesco is like, this is a holy war. We need to batten down the hatches and become a fortress again and become, soldiers again. And Benitez is like, we need to open up the doors and love everyone. It's like a much more Christ-like kind of, and importantly Christ-like because he is very much a Christ figure.
Absolutely. He is almost shot to look as though he holds the Christ pose. He has this kind of beatific, still calmness about him throughout the entire film.
He's often dressed in the clothes that he wore to the Vatican.
Yes, he doesn't have the pomp and circumstance
He's
of
an
all
angel,
the garb.
essentially.
He is like an angel figure. And lo and behold, after this terrorist attack and after this speechifying from Tedesco and Benitez's response, they vote again and Benitez wins. In a stunning turn, this man who we did not know existed in the Catholic Church until, 3 days earlier, has been named the Pope. Brian F. O'Byrne plays a Monsignor Ray, who is sort of like the attaché to Dean Lawrence. And throughout the film, he has been going on, he's sort of the investigator. He's kind of the Andre Brower in the Primal Fear of this movie. He keeps getting information. He goes out and he interviews people and he comes back and he gets info. He's getting some info on the activities of Cardinal Tremblay, Lithgow's character throughout the film. He's trying to get to the bottom of what the Pope is actually up to. And the other thing that he's looking into is Benitez's past and his medical history.
Yep.
And after Benitez is elected, O'Byrne's character goes to Dean Lawrence and says like, hey, I didn't know this was going to happen. Like I never would have guessed that Benitez would have been elected Pope, and wish I had talked to you this morning rather than this afternoon, because one of the things I learned is why he went to Switzerland to a clinic where he had an examination of some kind done.
It didn't go through with a procedure.
And this was all at the Pope's behest, as he had been, furthering this relationship with Benitez in the church. Dean Lawrence is told what it is, but we don't see him get told what it is. And then the next sequence is Lawrence goes and confronts Benitez about what it is that he's learned from Ray, which is that Benitez's character is intersex. He has both male and female sexual organs, and
he has a uterus. Yeah.
He has a uterus. And this is like genuinely one of the weirdest reveals I can remember in a pop film. And it is meant to really like confront your ideas of what is our willingness to open our minds.
Yeah.
What can the church represent? How do you really live your values?
And also, can these church liberals walk the talk.
Yes.
Because they've been talking about, we need to reach out, we need to be a church for everyone, we need to be permissive in the roles of women and gays in the church, and really start modernizing this institution in the face of someone like Tedesco, who's like, I want to take us back to the Middle Ages. And Benitez is the lightning bolt again from heaven that's like, are you, it's time to be about what you say you're about. Right?
Yes. And the movie to this point, particularly right up until Benitez's election, is what I was referring to earlier, was sort of like flattering the sensibilities of a certain kind of liberal moviegoer who probably sees a lot of Focus Features films, that is just like, I'm a good Democrat and I vote blue down the line, and I give money, and I think, fascism is on the rise in this country. And there's a certain kind of storytelling that I think really leans into that. Now, this challenge in the story is interesting. I think it may be a step too far in our attempts to shock us with something that is just a sort of incidental biological truth about this character. And it is attempting to really be like, well, how liberal are you, sir?
Yes.
I don't want to say it was like a misstep, but it actually made me take the movie less seriously because it's so silly in the face of the rest of the story. People will read the movie differently.
It's been a while since my jaw dropped in a movie.
Yeah.
Because I really wasn't expecting this. I thought that the twist was that Benitez won, and that the twist was that the Pope always wanted Benitez to win, and he had basically orchestrated this. Because over the course of all the rounds of voting, Benitez very slowly but surely, every single time his name is mentioned, he gets another vote. So he starts at like 1, and then it's 3, and then it's 5 and 9, and then it's 13, and it's almost like this wave of God moving through these men finally to see like who truly deserves this role. And when he is elected, the name he takes is innocent. I didn't really read it as like confrontationally political. I mean, this is a 2016 novel. So yes, obviously like in the culture war mix, but I imagine was written over the course of a few years before that. I more took it to be the sprinkling of spirituality that this movie probably intentionally lacks because it's so procedural over the course of the film. Now, it is essentially a Dan Brown twist where the womb is the grail and this chalice, and this is this man who has a uterus is like been sent from heaven to save the church. I don't know how much it stands up to like intellectual interrogation, but I definitely was like, holy shit.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's really kind of where I've had more time to think about it. I had the same reaction as you the first time I saw it, and so did everyone else. I think everyone that I saw it with was like, whoa.
Yeah.
What a ride. What a crazy way to end that movie, which was otherwise very entertaining as well. Second time I saw it, I was like, this feels kind of cheap. This kind of feels like a cheap way of like shocking us without actually interrogating what had happened here. I think if the movie had maybe more directly clarified that we feel like the Pope is the one sort of driving the Benitez story, maybe that would have made sense. It's very, very hard to buy that a cardinal who no one knows with no experience gives 2 speeches and all of a sudden is anointed the highest position in one of the oldest faiths in the world. It's just hard to buy. It's just hard to believe. And this is almost meant to like wrong foot us off of that. Be like, don't think too much about how crazy this ending would be because we've got an even crazier ending for you.
But do you think that possibly like, it's like, is it crazier than anything else? Is it any crazier than 100 guys sitting in a room voting and burning their votes
to
decide who is the vessel of God on earth?
It's a good question. Obviously, the historical practices of the Catholic Church are weird. And when you look at them closely in their practical execution, it's hard to believe that millions have died because of the decisions that are made like this. And so you could say, sure, with that in mind, maybe this is more believable. But I thought it was like a turn of the dial too much for me. It doesn't mean that it's very entertaining. I don't know if it's actually like saying anything.
Me neither. I mean, I was like trying to read up a little bit. Obviously, just don't know much about the Catholic Church in a real way. And, there's a myth it was believed for a while, but there's a myth of a female pope in the 13th century, or like maybe it was written about in the 13th century, but it's from the 11th century. Pope Joan, who, you know, quietly ascended the ranks of the church without anyone noticing that she was a woman. That's been proven to be like fiction, but was a mythology for a while. And I know that it's like Catholics and Protestants really get angry at each other on message boards about this. So I'm not trying to wade too deeply into
Which message boards?
But I do think, Google Pope Joan, you'll find yourself in some weird places. I don't know. I just, for some reason, I was like, nice one, guys. I was just like, I think I was like, this really took courage to do this.
That's true.
You could really have ended it with being like, it turns out the real Pope was the guy who's helped people, you know? And I think that is the message, or that...
Yeah, I think that there's something like just a little Pollyanna about the whole, like, the meek shall inherit the earth aspect of the story at the end.
It's a Sidney Pollack movie, basically. I mean, like, it is, like, I mean...
It's just like a little too safe, because the truth is that the meek do not inherit the earth. I think, like, ultimately, like, you know, the metaphor of, like, him saving the turtle at the end of the movie and putting the turtle out into the water, and that being this kind of, like, conclusive, like, we must treat each other gently, for we will be more safe.
About a holy war, and Benitez is like, I've actually served this. I've ministered in Kabul and countries. Baghdad, so like you don't really know what you're talking about.
I think the movie is like unable to accept that both things, that actually they're not as in opposition to each other as they believe. Like, just because you believe you must accept all people doesn't actually mean that the world is war torn, and it doesn't actually mean that cynicism is unearned. I think, as a cynic, I tend to find endings like this in movies that are ostensibly about big ideas to just be like pretty cheap. I don't mean like using an intersex character to tell a story. That's not really my point. It's more just that they're like, this holy and anointed person has come along, and they are not exactly what you seem, but they are exactly what you need.
Yes. So I guess like the thing I would draw it back to is the Lawrence speech at the beginning of the Conclave, that he goes off book for, and is like, you know, this idea of certainty, and that's a lack of faith. And then he's just asked to put his faith in the hands of something he doesn't understand, which I kind of liked. Now, it comes out of nowhere, and then the movie ends. It's not like this is like interrogated at all, and Ray knows, and like I don't know what like Conclave 2, like the fallout would be. Conclave 2: Dead Reckoning.
I'd like to see that film.
Yeah, and what happens when Ray has the rabbit's foot? You know, like. But
is Benitez AI? Is that what we're meant to believe? He's too perfect.
Oh, is he Bill's Chat GPT? Roger Ebert. Do you think that that's a sin that he does that?
That Bill does Chat GPT? It's not ideal. I wouldn't ask for it. I'm not trying to lean on AI in our creative circumstances if we don't have to. Yeah. I know you're not an awards guy, but just awards it out with me.
Sure, man.
I think there's a sense now that there are 2, maybe 3 major contenders in Best Picture right now. And I find that list of 3 to be utterly fascinating. This can change a lot. Gladiator 2 is not out. Wicked is not out. Dune Part 2 is taking a back seat. The bigger commercial movies don't really seem to be competing in the same way that like Top Gun Maverick wasn't really competing, or Avatar: The Way of Water wasn't really competing. So you've got Anora, you've got The Brutalist, and I think you've got Emilia Perez. Those are the 3 movies. Now, I know you haven't seen any of those movies, so I'm not asking you to comment on them specifically, but all 3 of those movies are art house movies from hardline auteurs taking big risks on films that have maybe some of the bones in their log line of past Oscar films, but in the execution are unusual. Yes. And so those movies being the front runners, I think there's a feeling amongst some Oscar watchers that Conclave has a real traditional spoiler potential, that it's a movie that everyone's going to be like, I like that movie. Maybe it wasn't my favorite movie. And
so give me an analog to what Conclave was. Is that Green Book? Is that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if Roma is the arty contender in the mold of an Anora, an unlikely film with a lot of craft and a lot of big ideas, Anora is more of a crowd pleaser than Roma is, for sure. But Conclave is a movie that, like, I haven't talked to a lot of people that hate it. And so,
it's hard. I mean, I don't know how you could watch Stanley Tucci and Ray Fiennes argue for 2 hours and be like, that sucked.
There are 2 sequences between them One when Fiennes brings the materials that he's discovered
burn it.
to Tucci, and he tells him to burn it, and that you realize that Tucci has been a part of this kind of political consortium to gain power. And then the second scene that you mentioned, when Tucci realizes that he thinks it's Dean who should be the Pope. He thinks it's Fiennes' character. And he asks him, what name will you choose? And Fiennes is just so remarkable in that scene when he's like, John. Like, he knows, he's been thinking about this. So stuff like that's going to play really well with the Academy. Fiennes is definitely going to be nominated. I think Best Actor is very competitive this year.
He's won supporting actor, but never actor, right?
He's never won. He's only been nominated.
He didn't win supporting actor for Schindler's. Okay.
No, he was nominated for Schindler's, and it's the only time he's been nominated. He's excellent in this film and always excellent.
Is there anybody else that's kind of in the race with him for actor?
Well, you've got Coleman Domingo in Sing Sing and Daniel Craig in Queer, who I think are both going to compete pretty aggressively. I think Queer is going to be a harder sell, but it could be like The Whale, where like people don't necessarily love the movie,
James
but
Bond
they love the
did
performance.
Wild, yeah.
So I feel like picture an actor. It's definitely competitive in actor. I don't think it's going to be competitive in supporting actor. I could be wrong about that. I haven't really wrapped my arms around that race. Possibly. I don't know if he has enough of a fiery moment. He's very, very good in the movie. He's also beloved. Adapted screenplay for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think things like production design and costume design definitely competing because the movie looks so great. And I don't know, the picture thing, I can't get it out of my head.
I mean, I think Conclave will get in that 10.
It's getting in for sure. I think it's a top 5 movie. I guess it probably depends on if a bunch of people go see it. It did fine business.
Do you think it would show up in your top 10 of the year, at like your end of the year list?
No, this is a real like 3.5 out of 5 for me. Like, I liked it. Yeah. It was fun. I had a fun time. Once the deeper I look into it, especially as a lapsed Catholic, the less interested I am in it, to be honest with you.
I didn't see the trailer and didn't know anything about this movie going into it, and I think that was, I knew about it, but I purposely did not watch the trailer. I found, I think the terrorist explosion is in the trailer. I think there's some stuff in there.
But you don't know what it is when you see that.
But I think it's really exciting when that happens because I didn't know that was an element in the film at all.
Yeah. We didn't even mention the subplot about Adeyemi, the African cardinal, and what is revealed about him too. That actor is also wonderful. I want to make sure I get his name right. But that's another sequence.
Lucien Mismati.
Yeah, that's another sequence with Fiennes where Fiennes confronts him ultimately to tell him that he will not be Pope. That is just that both of those actors in that scene are so
like, is
good.
There's still hope, and he's like, there is no hope.
Yes, that's an amazing sequence. So the movie's just kind of rippling with all of these moments.
Yeah.
I think I was just a little bit more down on the ending, having seen it a second time.
I'll be very curious to see. I haven't seen anybody who was like that ending ruled.
It was just shocking,
but I think that there are different reactions to the twist and the shock and like what the movie is maybe trying to say. I liked the fact that it ended quickly after that, perhaps a little abruptly, but it does not reckon with it. Like it kind of puts it out there, and then it's like, you guys go to dinner and think about this now. It's not like, here's how Ray Fiennes basically puts a turtle in the pond and looks up at the sky and smiles.
But then what do you think of it then? I guess is what I'm trying to get to. Like, if you we're having the dinner conversation right now. Like, what does that choice mean other than to shock you?
I don't know. I mean, godliness comes in all different packages, right? Like that like our concepts of like what the vessel for holiness is restrictive.
Right. And it should be accepted on all fronts, because then it ultimately feels like a film that is very much like a faithful film. And faithful films also they have a complicated history at the Academy Awards.
They're very popular.
God is dead in Hollywood,
But they are very popular.
They are. And I wonder if the movie will be read that way, because I think conservative, God-fearing people who go see Lionsgate movies about, Jesus Christ playing volleyball or whatever, like those people are not going to go see this movie.
Right.
And most of the people who are going to go see this movie, in all likelihood are not devout. Maybe some are.
Sure.
Some are.
Yeah.
But, there's more heathens amongst
I don't know.
the indie
I'm trying
film
to
crowd.
decide. I really couldn't even imagine if I was Catholic, like practicing Catholic, if I would be offended by this film.
Yeah, I don't know if it's I'm honestly not sure. Bob, you're a practicing Catholic. What do you think?
Not quite practicing anymore, and I haven't seen the film, so what do you want me to say? I'll let you guys know in about a week.
Does godliness come in all forms?
God loves all of us equally.
There you go.
Yeah, Francisco Lindor, Michael Bay,
Chase Utley.
Well, there is a Satan after all. Any closing thoughts on Conclave? You enjoyed it?
Yeah, I mean, I really did. I don't think that it would be like a best film of the year for me or anything like that, but it was a throwback for me of like, man, I am glued to my seat. Like, I'm very, very, very curious about where this is going. And I think that you mentioned it, but the mechanics of it are no different than an action film. Something happens every 11 minutes where you're like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, I agree. CR, thank you.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for your work. Thanks for admitting all of your carnal desires from the film The Hotspot on this episode. Appreciate that. As usual, you brought the heat. Thanks to CR, Chris Ryan. Thanks to Jack Sanders. And thanks to our producer, Bobby Wagner, for his work on today's episode. Next week on the show is Tuesday, Election Day. We have a very special draft. Please go vote. See you then.